Put yourself in the shoes of a senior official in the Biden-Harris administration. Say you're running the DOJ, and right now you know that in just a matter of months, you could be out of a job. In fact, that seems pretty likely at this point. If there's any important causes that you want to pursue or policies you want to defend, well, now's the time to do it. This is your opportunity to cement your legacy, at least until the next administration fires you and completely dismantles it. Given that setup, what would you make a top priority? With so many things going wrong in the country, what are the battles you choose to fight with the limited time you have left? We're not quite technically in the lame duck period, but everyone in this administration is asking this question right now anyway. And as low as your expectations may be for the Biden-Harris administration, their answer to that question is pretty remarkable. In what could very well be their final days and weeks in power, senior leaders in the federal government are going to federal court to defend DEI policies. And I'm not talking about just any garden variety DEI policy here. As we speak, the Justice Department is going to court to demand that the DEI is used in the selection process to appoint an independent monitor to oversee Boeing, the aircraft manufacturer. The job of this independent monitor is to make sure that Boeing stops making planes that fall apart in the sky or just completely fall out of the sky. In other words, the Biden-Harris DOJ is fighting to ensure that the second largest commercial jet manufacturer in the world is supervised by a DEI hire. What could possibly go wrong? Well, a lot, as we've seen. And you know that if you've been following Boeing lately. There's a decent documentary on Netflix called Downfall, the case against Boeing, that outlines a lot of the background. But here's the gist. As you probably remember, there were two fatal crashes involving Boeing 737 MAX aircraft in 2018 and 2019. A total of 346 people were killed in just a few months. Investigation revealed that the crashes were linked to Boeing's decision to accelerate production of the 737 MAX to compete with their rival Airbus. The design of Boeing's new 737 MAX was a lot like the older Boeing jets, but with one key exception. The engines were larger and they were positioned further forward on the plane. While this helped with efficiency, it came with a side effect, which is that the plane had a tendency to pitch upwards during flight. So to counteract that tendency, Boeing designed a new software program that they installed on their new 737 MAX aircraft. The idea was that the software would automatically lower the nose to a level position if the plane started creeping upwards. It was supposed to be kind of a subtle fix that the pilots wouldn't really notice. The problem is that the software was completely dependent on one sensor on the plane called the angle of attack sensor. And if that sensor failed or malfunctioned for whatever reason or provided inaccurate data, the plane would inaccurately believe that it was climbing too quickly, and the software in response would make the plane plunge towards the earth. And that's exactly what happened in both of those cases. Here's coverage of one of the crashes. Watch.
But shortly after takeoff, Ethiopian Flight 302 is suddenly out of control. A critical sensor sending information to the plane's new flight control system called MCAS has malfunctioned. MCAS thinks the aircraft is in a stall and literally takes over the controls, pitching the plane into a steep dive.
Now, what's incredible about this crash, the Ethiopian Airlines one, is that it happened after the Lion Air crash several months earlier. And after the Lion Air crash, Boeing sent out advisories to a bunch of airlines warning them about their software. They said that if they encounter a similar issue, pilots should just turn off the electrical system of that part of the aircraft to disable the software entirely. The problem is that when the Ethiopian pilots did that, they encountered a bunch of other unexpected issues that they weren't really trained on, and they were panicking. And during the chaos, they left the throttle on maximum, which made it impossible to control the plane without the help of the electrical system. And when they tried to regain some control, they turned the electrical system back on, at which point the plane promptly crashed itself. Now, obviously, there are a lot of failures that occurred in this whole situation. The regulators at the FAA delegated a lot of their responsibilities to Boeing, which meant that Boeing was in charge of certifying the safety of its own software. Additionally, Boeing knowingly made false representations about its software during the certification process. That part is not in dispute. Boeing admits this. This summer, Boeing agreed to plead guilty to conspiring to defraud the government concerning the 737 MAX's software. And then Boeing and the DOJ filed a plea agreement so that a judge could review it. And the plea agreement essentially makes Boeing, as a company, like the company equivalent of a convicted felon. And they're still making our airplanes that we fly on, so that should make you feel good. But to his credit, the judge, whose name is Reed O'Connor, isn't signing off on the plea deal, at least not yet. This is a bit like the situation with Hunter Biden this summer. Just because both parties agree to a plea deal, it doesn't mean the judge has to accept it. And in this case, there's a very important reason why the judge won't accept it. Quoting from the judge's order this month, quote, "The agreement mandates an independent compliance monitor to assess whether Boeing has adequately mitigated the risk of providing false or fraudulent information to the Federal Aviation Administration and other government regulators. Like many of the agreement's other provisions, the victims strongly oppose the agreement's compliance monitor requirements. Among other reasons, the victims argue the court should reject the agreement because it allows the government, not the court, to select a monitor with input from Boeing and in keeping with the department's commitment to diversity and inclusion." Now, in other words, just to translate, both the judge and the victims' families have an issue with this provision, and you can see why. When both the regulator and the airline manufacturer mess up, causing the deaths of hundreds of people, then you would think you'd want to bring in the most competent people you can find in order to make sure that that never happens again. But that's not what's happening here. When the judge asked the government's attorney, Sean Tonoli, to explain what exactly this diversity, equity, and inclusion policy would entail, Tonoli responded that he's not an expert in the topic. But he eventually got around to saying that diversity refers to race, gender, background, and any number of factors, including background and experience. Tonoli added that inclusion is, quote, "another way of maybe saying the same thing and not excluding people because of any characteristic that would be included in diversity." Both of those explanations are incredibly circular, but he tapped out after that. He said he couldn't provide any more information than that, but he did insist that the government wouldn't pick somebody who was unqualified. Well, that led the judge to ask, quote, "Did the department used to exclude certain people on race, gender, and other things?" And in response to that question, Tonoli responded, "Not to my knowledge," which was an alarming answer, to say the least, especially when you're talking about making sure that more planes don't fall out of the sky. The answer should be an unequivocal no, we definitely wouldn't exclude anyone based on race or gender. It's wrong to discriminate on that basis in any context, but it's completely insane to do it when you're talking about regulating Boeing, which, if you haven't noticed, is having a lot of problems right now, both on this planet and in space. So the judge asked Boeing for their input, but they just deferred to the government's answer. And then the judge pulled up Boeing's website, where he found that the company has a set of aspirations that it plans to achieve by next year. And those aspirations, which are based on DEI, include explicit quotas on the basis of race, including Boeing's efforts to, quote, "increase the black representation rate in the U.S. by 20% and close representation gaps for historically underrepresented groups." The judge also found that Boeing pays its executives bonuses depending on how many of their DEI goals they have achieved. Now, at the moment, we don't know exactly how this legal battle will play out. The judge has said that he wants a full hearing on all of this before he signs off on any plea agreement. He wants to make sure that the Biden-Harris administration is going to select someone who can do the job before any more people die in Boeing airplanes. And based on the statements of Boeing and the Biden-Harris administration so far, the judge doesn't have those assurances. Now, if you look at any corporate media coverage of this story, you'll find a lot of snark directed at the judge. Reuters, for example, ran this headline, quote, "How a U.S. judge injected culture wars into Boeing 737 MAX plea deal." They interviewed a lawyer who criticized the judge, saying that he was acting incredibly unusual. CNN, meanwhile, accused the judge of engaging in a politically tinged courtroom battle. Now, this is the same debate, the same tactic we've seen in the trans debate and in so many other areas. Left-wing activists implement some new insane policy, and when you push back against it in any way, or even just ask questions about it, you're accused of injecting a culture war in a way that's somehow inappropriate. It's not injecting a culture war when Boeing and the federal government both decide to, begin with this DEI insanity in the first place. But it is a culture war when a judge asks if we're hiring the most qualified people to make sure that more planes don't crash themselves into the ocean. Now, the reason these outlets are lashing out like this is that they recognize that this judge's ruling is significant. They realize that they're indeed losing the culture war on this topic, the war that, like every other battlefield of the culture war, These are all wars that they started. It's wars that the left started. This is the first time that I'm aware of that a federal judge has explicitly called out DEI in the context of an ongoing case, and he's demanded to know what exactly it entails. And in response, the government and Boeing, which both practice DEI, couldn't even answer the question. It's yet another sign that the tide is turning pretty sharply against the whole concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly when lives are at stake. That's why, when I started working on my film, Am I Racist, a few years ago, developments like this were pretty difficult to imagine at the time. But throughout the process, we all knew that taking down DEI meant exposing exactly what it is in practice. Once reasonable people can see exactly what diversity, equity, and inclusion entails, then they turn against it, as with so many other things on the left. When people just see what it actually is, and they see past the euphemisms, once you've revealed what it actually is to people, many times you don't even have to explain why it's wrong because it's so self-evident. People recognize that it's immoral and unethical, not to mention incredibly dangerous in cases like this. And they also recognize that the high priests of the DEI cult actually have no idea what they're talking about. Like Boeing's lawyers or the various experts and activists I spoke to in the film, these people can't even define the terms that they're constantly repeating. And that's the big reason why I'm excited about the streaming release of Am I Racist? As you may have heard, my new film is coming to Daily Wire Plus on Monday. We'll be able to show the film to people who, for one reason or another, weren't able to see it in theaters, or if you were able to see it, now you'll have access to it whenever you want at your house. We'll be exposing the DEI grift to an audience of millions of more people. And when it comes to DEI, exposure is fatal. And mockery is intolerable also for them. And we do a lot of both of those things in this film. And thanks to everyone who's supported us in the theaters, we produced the top documentary of the decade. We showed how some of the biggest names in the industry are complete and total and hilariously frauds. And we had a lot of fun doing it. So if you're not subscribed to Daily Wire and you want to watch the film, you can get 35% off your membership right now with code DEI. I hope you'll support us. We didn't start this particular culture war, but because of your support, it's very clear that we're winning it now. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.